It was a cool August evening in 1980s New Hampshire when Jeff Turner, a man in his early 30s, drove down the winding, narrow roads towards the water treatment plant. Goose Hollow wasn't the kind of place you pass through on your way to somewhere else. It was a secluded, unremarkable town hidden among the forests and hills of northern New Hampshire. The town itself was small, just a few buildings clustered along the road, surrounded by dense, dark woods. If you blinked, you might miss it. The plant, located a little over an hour up into the White Mountains, sat in a small clearing deep in the woods, far from any residential areas. It was an old facility, one of the first of its kind to be built in the region, now showing signs of decay. A relic from a bygone era, no longer running at full capacity, and barely maintained by the small crew of workers who still showed up each month to perform necessary checks. Jeff wasn't a stranger to late-night shifts. He had worked them before in the cities of Plymouth and Meredith. But this place, deep in the White Mountains, was different. It was isolated, eerily so. The kind of place that felt abandoned, even when it wasn't. He didn't mind the extra money, but there was something about this place that didn't sit right with him. On this particular night, Jeff was in the main tunnel. The only sound was the steady drip of water echoing off the concrete and the rhythmic undulations of the few remaining machines in the plant. He was making his rounds, checking equipment and jotting down notes on his clipboard. The faint light of his headlamp casting shadows along the narrow, damp passage. Then, he heard something. It was faint at first. Just the softest shuffle of footsteps behind him. His heart skipped a beat. He paused, turning his head quickly, but the tunnel was empty. Just the empty, hollow sound of the concrete surrounding him. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just the acoustics of the place, playing tricks on him. But the uneasy feeling lingered. He tried to keep busy. He'd done late-night shifts before. He'd seen and heard things in his time. But this place, this old water treatment plant, felt wrong in a way he couldn't describe. As the end of the month approached, Jeff found himself growing more and more apprehensive. He tried to push the thoughts away, but the drive to the White Mountains and the long shift ahead kept creeping back into his mind. It was late September, and the temperature had dropped considerably. The wind howled through the trees, and Jeff could barely make out the road ahead of him as he navigated the twisting path to the plant. He tried to ignore the unease settling in his gut, but it was no use. By the time he pulled into the gravel parking lot, his nerves were already shot. The lot was dark and empty, no other cars around. He cursed under his breath, quickly exiting the truck and heading toward the building. The familiar sound of his boots crunching on the gravel was the only thing grounding him in reality. As he entered the plant, it was just as he remembered, cold, empty, and eerily silent. The metal doors groaned as they swung outwards, Jeff latching them open. Only a few dim lights lit the depths of the tunnel. Jeff set to work on the maintenance checks, but tonight something felt off. His headlamp bobbed through the dimly lit facility as he made his way to the upper deck, the chill of the night air biting at his skin. The wind rustled through the trees below, but it was the silence inside that made his skin crawl. It felt as if the building was holding its breath. He was walking past a row of high-pressure valves when he heard it again. A faint shuffle. This time it was closer. His heart thudded in his chest as he turned his head, his light cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. Then he saw it. A tall shadow moved swiftly behind a larger pipe at the far end of the deck. It was quick, too quick for any normal person. Jeff froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. His thoughts raced, but before he could move, a chill washed over him. It felt as if something was watching him. His breath hitched. With the adrenaline surging through his veins, he turned on the brightest setting of his headlamp and called out,
"Hey, who's there?"
The words felt weak, swallowed up by the darkness. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't wait for a reply. He turned and moved quickly through the narrow walkway, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. He looked down towards the distant corner where the shadow had disappeared. Nothing. But as his gaze swept across the dark woods to his left, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the fence. Deciding he'd had enough for the night, he quickly finished his checks on the upper deck and made his way to the East Bay room. He didn't care if he had missed a few spots. He wasn't sticking around longer than necessary. Jeff returned the following weekend, but as he made his rounds through the tunnels, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small, rusted metal door stood at the far end of the main tunnel. It was wedged partially open, a faint crack where the door met the concrete. Curiosity, coupled with an ever-growing sense of unease, made him approach. He peered through the crack, his heart racing as he saw something inside, old papers scattered across the floor. He tried to open it, but the door wouldn't budge. It was stuck, rusted shut from years of neglect. He pushed harder, but it didn't give. The last thing he needed was to get stuck in the tunnel with whatever was lurking out there. But something about that room called to him. The papers, the old smell of mildew, and something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Deciding he couldn't waste any more time, Jeff moved on with his checks. But the door nagged at him, like a splinter lodged deep in his mind. By the time Jeff made his way down the tunnel that night, the fear had become almost unbearable. He had finished his checks on the upper deck and was moving quickly through the lower tunnels when he heard them again, the footsteps. Slowly, steadily, they grew louder as if someone, or something, was following him. The sound echoed through the tunnel, sending waves of panic through his chest. Jeff turned down the wrong staircase, a route he didn't remember ever taking before. But tonight, everything seemed different. The tunnel felt unfamiliar, like something was off. As he reached the corner, the sound of the footsteps halted. He spun around, looking into the darkness. There, at the very far end of the main tunnel, a tall shadow stood motionless. His heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He turned and ran to a large, rusty metal door. It was the door from before. It was hidden in the shadows, just off the main path. It was tough to open, but with all his strength he shoved it open, the metal screeching in protest. He slammed the door behind him as he ducked inside. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing heavily as the footsteps grew louder, then stopped. Then came the sounds, the dragging of metal pipes. The scraping echoed in the dark. Jeff's pulse quickened as he huddled behind some old pipes, praying the door would hold. His breath came in shallow gasps as he listened to the entity outside, its presence palpable in the silence. Then, a loud banging on the door rattled him to his core. He could hear it on the other side, something heavy, something powerful. The footsteps continued, growing fainter, until they finally disappeared. Jeff sat in the dark room for what seemed like an eternity, his body stiff with fear. He could hear the faintest whispers on the wind, but they were too distant to understand. Finally, after what felt like hours, the light of dawn crept into the tunnel, signaling the end of the night shift. Jeff couldn't shake the feeling as he rushed to the bay room, quickly checking the main valves to ensure everything was in working order. The sun had risen, casting a cold light over the facility. His heart still raced as he grabbed his things and ran to his truck, starting the engine and speeding down the narrow road. He glanced in the rearview mirror. His breath caught in his throat as he swore he saw a shadow moving in the trees just beyond the plant. A tall, dark figure standing still as the light of the morning illuminated the forest around it. Weeks later, Jeff found himself sitting at a bar, nursing a beer, still haunted by the events of that night. He was telling his story to an old man who had worked in the area for years. The man listened quietly, then nodded slowly.
You weren't the first, son. There been disappearances back there when they first built that place. Now listen, I go up there about 2 times a year to go fishing. Place always gives me the creeps when I pass by. And I'll tell you what, son, stay out of that place at night. Ain't a place to mess around. Go too deep in the woods over there, something might get you.
Jeff's blood ran cold. He hadn't known about the disappearances, and the thought of it sent a chill down his spine. The old man's words lingered in his mind, and for the first time since that night, he knew the truth. He would never go back to White Mountains alone.